Today, we're going to speak about the new neighbor condominium addendum. We're going to talk a little bit about why we ended up with a condominium addendum, and we're going to let you know that these changes are effective today. So we're hoping that after today's class that you will have a copy of this addendum and you'll know how to use it, and you'll have a little more insight into why we named it the new neighbor condominium addendum and why we didn't add it to the regular contract. So today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the basics. We're going to talk a little bit about the best practices with this new addendum. Bill's going to review the language of the addendum in detail, so you'll have a full insight into what is involved in this addendum. There's a lot of new things involved. There's a lot of new disclosures that are required by the recent changes to the Florida legislature to the condominium statute. And then we'll have ample time at the end to have questions, answers, and discussions for you. So if you got a question, maybe you want to save it, and we'll have plenty of time at the end. Okay, so I know this is going to be very basic for many of you, but how do I know that I'm dealing with a condominium? So the first place to go is to check the legal description of the residence, all right? And the majority of the legal descriptions will have the word condominium or condo in them. They will not have the letters HO or co-op, and yet there may be other properties that are involved in a condominium. There are some communities in Naples that have single-family homes involved in the condominium complex, so you may have to dig a little further. Please check the MLS listing for condo fees or uploaded attachments that can help you to confirm that you're dealing with a condominium when you're getting ready to write an offer. Call the management company listed in the MLS if there's doubt about how this community or this particular subdivision is organized. You can always go to collierclerk.com for those of you that are familiar with it. You can do an official record search, go to documents, put in the condominium name or the name of the community, and hit and select declaration and search, and many times that will bring up the condominium documents for you. So hopefully one of those solutions we prepared will allow you to confirm without a doubt that this is a condominium and you're going to need to use this addendum when you prepare your sales contract. Bill, anything there?
No, I think you're right on target. You're doing a great job as always, Jeff.
All right. Well, I just try to make sure. I know a lot of you are probably rolling your eyes going, well, how is he starting so simplistic, but no stone unturned in this presentation. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is some condominium considerations that have to do with this addendum. First of all, you need to check the number of stories of the building in the condominium that you're working with. All right. 2 stories or less will not require milestone inspections or reserve studies. However, if it's 3 stories or more, it may require both milestone inspections and structural reserve studies to be completed by 12/31. So buildings which are 30 years older or more as of July 1 of 22, remember that was when this statute was put into effect, was actually a little more than two years ago, 2.5 years ago now. So check the age of the building based on when it was built. There was another caveat put into the original condominium statute, and that said that buildings which are 25 years or older as of July 1 of 22 and less than 3 miles to the Gulf were required to have milestone structural inspections. However, local ordinances have changed this. The Collier County local ordinance regarding milestone inspections has been modified not to require buildings which are 25 years or older, but just 30 years or older, unless the building official from Collier County determines that it's a coastal property and they want the inspection done earlier than 30 years. So that's the local rules. if you are in the city of Naples, their website officially delineates both buildings which are 30 years older or more as of July 1, 2022, and buildings which are 25 years older and less than 3 miles to the Gulf. So the city of Naples has kept this 25-year older restriction, but Collier County has eliminated it except by the request of the building inspector, I guess it's called. Additional
Jeff,
information,
let me jump in for 1 second.
please,
One
absolutely.
thing that these folks need to keep in mind is 3 stories is determined by the Florida Building Code, and there's some people who will argue that 3 stories does not include parking, only improved stories. And I've read the Florida Building Code. My opinion is that it does include a ground level parking or below level parking in addition to the others. So you've got to count the parking level. It's not going to be up to a realtor to worry about whether it is or isn't. But I mention that simply because if you see a building that's got 2 levels of occupancy and 1 level of parking, I think you're on notice that that's a 3-story building. And as being on notice, you're going to need to dig into it a little bit to make sure that you get the documents that are required under the statute that we're going to go over. So for those of you out there that'll be selling condominiums, hopefully lots of them, keep in mind that parking is more than likely included as one of the 3 stories.
Thank you, Bill. Additional information has been added to the statute that are required to be supplied to the customer in order for them to conduct their 3-day right of review and exercise their right to rescission. If for some reason they do not get provided with all of these pieces of information, in addition to the 7 that are already on the books, they have a right to rescind for not receiving the information. So be careful with that. Those items added are the budgets for the upcoming year and the milestone inspection reports themselves. So those must be provided to the customer for their 3-day right of review. We'll talk about best practices here in a couple of minutes. Hopefully you as a listing agent have uploaded this information so that when a buyer's agent wants to write a contract, all that information will be available to them, and they don't have to go searching for it or calling the management company for the milestone inspection report, which is now required for those structures that we mentioned up above. 3 stories or more, 30 years older, and in the case of the city of Naples or the local building official in Collier can request it. So there you go.
Jeff, let me jump in here as well. That
Sure,
I want everyone to know that there's 2 parts of what we're talking about here insofar as these structural issues are concerned. One is the milestone inspection, which has to be done at 30 or 25 years, depending upon whether the local building official says 25 years is necessary. And that is a visual, possibly followed by an invasive study of the building, the structural components, to determine if there anything there that seems to be deteriorating or affecting the structural integrity. And in addition to that, once you've done that, then you also, condominium associations, have to have a structural integrity reserve study. So when they've determined what the structures are, they need to also have set aside a study. They have to prepare a study which says, here's how much money you need to replace or repair these items as they come due. And that includes the things you might think of: roof structure, fireproofing, plumbing, electrical. And that's required. Now, the structural integrity reserve studies are required for all condominiums every 10 years, whereas the milestone inspections are only required at reaching 25 or 30 years of age. So some of the younger associations are still going to be required to be doing the structural integrity reserves. The visual component of the structural integrity reserve study can be done only by an engineer or an architect. The milestone inspection can only be done by an engineer or architect, but calculating the reserves can be done by someone who is qualified to do that as a specialist or a professional reserve analyst qualified under the Community Association Institute or another entity. So I want to share that with you. So if you do get a structural integrity reserve study and the actual reserve was not prepared by an architect or engineer, that doesn't mean that it's not qualified under the statute.
And if you look into the ordinance, there can be up to 10 items involved in these studies. So if you want, we can certainly provide you with more detail, but I think your responsibility as an agent is to make sure that the milestone inspections were done and the structural reserve studies are set up. Now, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, there may already be reserves on the books of condominiums that have set aside money for some of these items in the structural reserve. Is that correct?
Yes, and there could even be studies if they're no more than 5 years old that meet the requirements of the new statute, they will qualify. But one thing that can't be done in the future, and this is something that realtors may want to explain to their buyers, is that in years past, one of the problems with the Surfside tragedy was associations often would vote to defer or eliminate funding of reserves and thereby kick the can down the road on having money to do things. And then when they had no money, would try to avoid doing them. Under the new statute, associations will not be allowed to defer funding for structural reserves. They'll have to fully fund those reserves. And that means that people buying into these associations are going to be paying substantially more than they may have been paying in the same association just the year before.
So I think that that's the watchword that you need to come up with from today, is that the cost of living and the cost of ownership of condominiums, especially those over 3 stories, can be a factor in your buyer's decision as to whether they want to buy or not. So I think it's important that they have these numbers and that they have eyes wide open as you're going through the purchase process with them, so they know exactly what the fees are going to be and what they can expect the cost of ownership to be. So I think that's really an important point. Thank you so much, Bill.
Yeah, let me just explain that too. If an association has not been reserving for its roof, for example, and now under the statute, they've done their structural integrity reserve study, done their milestone inspection, and it says the roof's going to have to be replaced in about 5 years and it's going to cost $800,000. They're going to have to set aside into that particular account 1/5 of $800,000 each year. And if they have other structural items they haven't saved money for, that means they're going to have to do the same thing. So it's not just necessarily going to be a potential increase. It could be a huge increase for a buyer. And just as they get unhappy when they find out that they don't get to inherit the seller's homestead tax break, some of these buyers might be real unhappy to find out that assessments are no longer $1,500 a month, but they're now $8,000 a month. So realtors need to be very careful to make sure that they're looking at these things and looking at reserve accounts and looking at the reserve studies. And although they don't necessarily explain those, at least sensitize their customers to taking a look at that as part of the purchase process.
Yeah, and that really can have an effect on your whole approach to presenting a condominium complex to a potential buyer. I certainly don't want to be, why didn't you hear the question, why didn't you tell me this, as they, prepare for their purchase. So the next thing I think we want to get involved with here is so a couple of condominium considerations here. This is a picture of Mercado. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, or all of you. We need to define what is a multi-parcel building. As part of the revisions to the condominium statute, the legislature set up a defined term called a multi-parcel building, which is built into the new condominium addendum. Okay. So this is a building which shares both commercial and residential condominium space. The commercial portion, usually on the first floor, has nothing to do with the condominium space. The amenities are the condominium amenities. Any of the amenities for the commercial space are not subject to access by the condominium owners. So the common elements of the condominium space are limited to and governed by the condominium association, with the cost borne by its members. Now, in the case of Mercado, you have a beautiful rooftop area where there's all kinds of nice amenities. They don't have anything to do with the commercial space on on the first floor of the building, and neither do any of the amenities on the first floor of the building have anything to do with the residential structure. But you're going to be asked the question in the condominium addendum, is this a multi-parcel building? And if so, you need to know that the commercial portion of the building is not part of the condominium. And it'll have its own governance as stated in its own governing documents. So these could be individual commercial condominiums on the first floor, or they could have different ownership, but they'll have some governing documents. And the important thing to remember here is the operating costs of the commercial portion will be prorated between the commercial unit owners and the condominium owners based on these governing documents. So you could, as a condominium unit owner in a multi-parcel building, be responsible for some of the costs of the first floor commercial space that's not part of the condominium. Bill, can you help me out with that a little bit?
No, I think that's exactly right. That the statute really forces mixed use condominiums to address how they're going to take care of these structural integrity reserves, because the structural integrity and the milestone inspections are only required for residential condominiums. And so if there's a commercial or if there is even a residence in there that is not part of an association, which would be very unusual but possible, then the statute mandates that those coordinate to determine how each is going to pay to do whatever needs to be done for its portion. So the concept is that we want to let buyers know, as part of Florida's effort to disclose and let everyone in the world think it's very safe to buy property here, that they're buying into something where their residential condominium may not have complete control over it.
Yeah, I think we're all familiar with Mercado. It's been there for years, but if you drive down 41, a lot of the older buildings are being torn down and new buildings are being put up. And on the first floor is generally commercial space, and above it is residential space. And there's quite a bit of that, both off Fifth Avenue and on your way down 41 now, some of the newer buildings. So it's important if you have a buyer interested in these spaces, that they understand exactly what the limitations are, exactly what the common elements for that condominium are, and exactly what the interaction with the commercial portion on the first floor is. And that's why we've dedicated a whole a paragraph in this new addendum to identifying multi-parcel buildings and making sure the buyer understands exactly what the rules are going to be. So let's spend a couple minutes talking about best practices before we get into the language of the addendum. First of all, the seller is now responsible to provide the information at the time you take the listing. The seller has much more responsibility under the guidelines in this addendum, because certainly as a realtor, you may not have any idea what this information is, and possibly your seller at the time you're taking the listing maybe needs to do some research, because they're required to answer questions in this addendum, and these questions can dramatically affect the outcome of the contents of the addendum, right, Bill? I mean, I think the place where this gets really important is the seller know exactly what they're putting into the addendum.
Right, and I will, to help with that, the statute mandates that every association provide a copy or a summary of the milestone inspection and the reserve study within 45 days after they are completed to all unit owners. So unit owners are going to be on notice and are going to have some information about that. So a very important listing agent to speak with their owners and to get that information at that time.
And we've modified the listing contract as part of this process to provide for the seller to provide for the seller to do the research and answer these questions at the time you're taking the listing, rather than the buyer's agent scrambling around when they're submitting the contract. So it's hopefully that the sellers will cooperate with you and give you that information or find out that information as you're taking the listing. The listing agent would do really well to upload the completed MLS addendum, the complete condominium addendum to the MLS. So if you're looking to write a sales contract on this property, surely would be a nice idea to have the addendum completed and signed on the seller's side, so that all you need to do is bring it down, go over it with your buyer, and have your buyer sign it to submit with the offer. Obviously, this addendum has to be included as part of the sales contract in order for the buyer to have the right of review and rescission. If it's not provided for some reason, the buyer can rescind, really, Bill, at any time during the process, correct?
That's correct.
So a buyer's agent needs to follow the following required steps to include the addendum as part of the sales contract. We have removed references to the condominium statute in the sales contract, partially because we didn't want to add 3 pages to the sales contract, and partially because we felt like it should be included as a separate part of the process, and focusing on making sure the buyer and seller have all the information they need to make a decision. So in the new version of the sales contract, in the addenda, you'll see a box for the condominium addendum. You got to check that box, and you have to have the buyer sign the addendum when you're submitting a sales contract. Otherwise, the addendum does not apply to the terms of the sales contract. Bill, anything you'd like to add there?
No, I think you covered it well.
Okay. So the listing agent now has to provide the buyer, or hopefully provides the buyer, with all 9 required documents, the other 7 that were already in place, plus the budget for next year, the milestone inspection reports, and the structural reserve studies. I think the receipt just names the milestone inspection reports, does it, Bill? I don't think it refers specifically to the structural reserve studies, but certainly those can be provided at the same time.
Yeah, the addendum does reference both, but the receipt, I'm not sure.
So now the listing agent has the opportunity to provide the current condo fees, assessments, and management contact information below the signature line on this addendum. So they're not binding. I think Bill guided us in the right direction to put this information below the signature. However, everybody, I think, has been seeking a place to put the condo fees, assessments, and management company information. And that's why we see so many people supplying homeowners association documents, homeowner disclosures with the condo, so that, because they're like, well, I need a place to put these fees and assessments. I need to have them. So now you do have an opportunity at the end of the condominium addendum to provide this information. Again, it's non-binding, it's below the signature line, but it does give the listing agent the opportunity to provide the current information to the buyer. And again, if this is uploaded to MLS, this makes the process a lot easier for the buyer's agent. Okay. So the last step is to talk about the new neighbor condominium effective 1/1/2025. It's 3 pages. And again, there's the signatures up above and space for disclosure of the condominium fees, assessments, and other particulars. Now, where do I get that information? You can find that information in a PDF that we sent you today. You can also find it by going to neighbor.com. In the quick links in the upper right of the screen, you can go to neighbor.com contracts, and all of the current versions of the contracts are there, including the new condominium addendum. You can also find them in your broker's forms library. However, I give you a little caution today. We've just been releasing so many new documents to the forms vendors, be it DocuSign, .loop, Form Simplicity, app files. So I'm not sure you can guarantee all of these documents are going to be there today. We've released them all, but it takes time for them to receive them and program them with the particular boxes. So you may not see them all if you go to look for them today, but you might make sure to ask your broker when they're going to be provided. In the meantime, you can get them from nabor.com, contracts, quick links.